wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deeper seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. But time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Good evening, everybody. It's John here from Tutor to You. Welcome you along to another revision clinic, this time for Paper 2 for AQA A-Level Law. Good evening to you if you're watching this live. I hope Paper 1 went okay for you. We've already said that if you watched our Tort Law revision blast last Thursday. And of course, Paper 2 coming up very, very soon, next Tuesday. So here we are to have a 20 to 25 minute clinic where we'll try and field as many of your questions as we possibly can. Now, the blurb next to the YouTube window would have told you that we've got Gemma and Nathan tonight. Gemma unfortunately can't be with us. She's not feeling so well, so I hope you're feeling better soon, Gemma. But I do have Nathan. Nathan, good evening to you. How are you?
I'm okay, John. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks very much. Right. Now, Nathan's going to introduce a few questions in a moment or two just to get the ball rolling. Things that we've been asked by students on other occasions, at other events. But what we really want to do is field as many live questions as we can over the next 20 minutes. So please do start popping those questions into the chat window as soon as you possibly can, and we'll get round to them as soon as Nathan's gone through one or two other questions. But if I hand over to you, Nathan, for a few minutes, and we'll see what pops up on the chat window. Is that okay?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, so while we're waiting for some questions, then let's start with some of these. And as I said, these are some of the sort of questions that we've had in the past, and that sort of go into the very sort of heart of paper 2, and perhaps some of the errors that have creeped in before. So the first one is, what is the Robinson test for negligence? Now, Robinson is really important now. And it's really vital that you use it in a negligence question, a negligence scenario. Robinson has changed the landscape about establishing a duty of care. And obviously, establishing a duty of care is that first step, that you have a duty of care, that it's breached, and that it causes loss. Before the duty test came with Robinson, we had to use the 3-stage test in Kapara and Dickman. That is now no longer relevant in most cases for you guys. So what Robinson says is that where there is an established duty, i.e., where there is a set of facts which have already come before the courts, and in those facts, a duty has been established. For example, there have been tens of thousands of cases which have said that drivers owe their passengers and other road users a duty of care. Where that happens again, then you can use Robinson. And so use that in the scenario. You don't need to go through the 3-stage test of Kapara and Dickman. You can easily just mention that this case is established. For example, Nettleship and Weston is an established case of a driver owing passengers a duty of care. What you could say very quickly is that if this were not a new case, then we would need to use the 3-stage test set out in Kapara and Dickman. And that's really good. That's good as an examiner, because you know that the student knows that law, but also equally knows that they don't need to apply it. And so really you're getting sort of double AO1 for law, and you're getting double AO2 for application as well. Let's have a look at so we've got radioactive plays here. What do examiners look for in an ideal 30 marker? What draws them in? Is it lots of cases, good flow, an intro? It's a really good question, and there are there's lots going on in that question. So look, 30 markers is where you're going to get most of your marks from, isn't it? It's you do pretty well in those. You get sort of 20, 25 in those, then you've cruised past a C, maybe even got to a B before you've answered anything else on the paper. The good thing about paper 2, and I don't want to say it will always be the case, but so far those 30 markers, you have 2 things to find. Rylance and Fletcher and nuisance, negligence and psychiatric injury, pure economic loss and vicarious liability. There are things that go together. You don't need an intro. It's not a sort of evaluative discursive essay as such, and there are lots of structures which I'm sure lots of you use. IDEA, IRAC, ILAC. The issue section is you setting out the topics you're going to talk about. In this scenario, it's whether Nathan is liable under Rylance and Fletcher, and whether he is liable under nuisance. And it's important that issue section, because it's you setting out to the examiner what you're going to talk about. And if you fail to talk about one of them because you run out of time, at least the examiner knows that you knew what you need to talk about. You need a good summary of the law for nuisance, for Rylance and Fletcher, whatever it is. We've often been asked about cases on Tutor to You. There are no set cases. The mark scheme talks about different levels of authority. A satisfactory, good, excellent level of statutory authority. That can be and should be a mix of cases and a statute where relevant. So, for example, if you're talking about the Occupiers Liability Act, for example. So it's a mix of those. I don't really want to put a number on it, but what I'd like to see is a nice summary of the law, and then it well applied. And so the application is almost worth more, and it should be worth more than the law. We normally say 10 marks for law, 20 marks for application. And so it's about, once you've explained the law with some cases in, it's then about using and quoting from the scenario as evidence to prove the law that you've just explained, really. That's really what we're looking for. Good summary of the law, and then really decent stretch in application. So we've got Nexus 7449. If you get the section wrong, are you marked down for it? Students often talk about whether they're marked down for things, will they lose marks for things? For example, if we're talking about 30 markers, the exam board and examiners, we don't start off at 30 marks and take marks down. What we do is start at zero and work upwards, if you like, which is why, sometimes, certainly if you're teaching, I say to my students, look, if something is not relevant, don't include it. So, for example, in negligence, we have different rules for professionals, for children, for learners. If in the scenario there are no children, don't mention it. You just want to mention the stuff that's relevant to the question that you're being asked for. Look, I don't think you would get marked down for it as such. I think it would be taken into consideration. But look, what we're not looking for a sort of memory exercise. What we're looking for is that you, as students, that you know the legal rules and that you can apply them in a scenario to come to a satisfactory conclusion. So, look, I think if you got all of the section numbers wrong, it may well be that would affect the banding, but I don't think you'd actually sort of lose sort of physical marks, if that makes sense. So just to make the point, someone's mentioned about evaluation. This is not, there are no evaluative questions as such on AQA. Some other boards like OCR do have them. It's possible, certainly on some of the past papers in the early days, there was some talk about advantages and disadvantages, but that tended to be in respect of the English legal system. I suppose where you could talk about evaluation is, on maybe a question about the 7-mark element of question 11, or maybe even, on question 9, the 15 marker. If there was a question on morality or fault, or even on the theory, there may be scope for you to bring in that, but very unlikely there would actually just be an evaluative question as such. I think we're still waiting for some more comments. So if we could go back to the other slide, please, and perhaps we can go through some more questions. Thank you. So I'm going to skip that second question because we've dealt with that, and it was a question that came up last week on the criminal paper. As I said, there isn't a set number. It talks about good, satisfactory, excellent. If you wanted me to put a number on it, as I mentioned last time, I would definitely want to see one case for a 5-marker, possibly three or four cases for a 10-marker, and then you go from there. So maybe for a 30-marker on nuisance and Rylance and Fletcher, maybe you'd want to see sort of 8 cases or so. So the next one is, sorry, can we just go back to that slide again, please? Thank you. How much should I write for each question? Well, again, it's really it's a really sort of difficult question to answer because some people use word processors, some people write very small, some people write very large. Then I think it's about quality. It's not about quantity as such. You need to be guided by the booklets. You can see for those sort of 30 markers that you are given around about 5 pages to write. Now, those booklets do tend to be the same. So you've got a lot more potentially to write on the criminal paper. On question 10, you might have 3 or 4 things you need to talk about, where as in the tort paper, you've only got 2 things. So there isn't a set amount. Let's have a look at. Let's go back to radioactive plays again, and then we've got a few more questions that we can go back to underneath that. So, do I need to include RV, or will just the case name suffice? Yeah, look, you don't need RV. In fact, you probably won't see that too many times. Obviously, Adamarco's there, but Adamarco is a gross negligence. R effectively means the crown. It's the Latin for rex or regina for king or queen. You won't see that so much in a tort paper. You will see, two names because it's a civil case and it's one person or one entity against another person or another entity. So that shouldn't be a problem in the tort paper. What I would suggest, though, is that you do try and remember those case names. If you can't remember the case names, and it does tend to be a real sticking point for students, and you can sort of imagine in an exam that they're trying to sort of think of a case name, and then the brain just sort of melts and sort of drops out of their ears. One of the things I get my students to do is that when you are reading the question and you're annotating and you're marking, when you realize it's a question on negligence or vicarious liability, write down as many cases as you can there and then. Then they're on the paper, they're out of your head, and you can actually get on and deal with the question, write out the law, then apply the law, rather than getting stuck wondering what that case name actually was. Just as a reminder as well, you do not need the years for cases. You should use the years of the statutes, though. So, Occupiers Liability Act 1957, Occupiers Liability Act 1984, etc. Try and remember those years for the statute. Let's have a look. What are the main theory topics for tort law? That's been asked twice now by Gerline G. I don't know whether that's Gerline, probably is. So last year, and there have been theory questions asked before. It's been included in the 7-mark elements of question 11 a couple of times for tort. But broadly speaking, since the spec came out, it's question 9 has centered on concepts. That changed last year, and paper 1 asked quite a difficult question about theory of criminal law, which concerned maximum certainty and correspondence principles. So I think the cat's out of the bag now, and I would not be at all surprised if theory of tort came up on Tuesday, and if it doesn't come up on Tuesday, I'd be very surprised if theory of contract didn't come up on the 10th. So look, the good news is for the theory of tort is that it's actually reworking things that you already know. None of that sort of new stuff, none of that sort of maximum certainty, correspondence principles, retrospective liability that you get on the criminal paper. So the main topics that tend to come up and that are on the spec, and I've been sort of working with this with my students, and we've been sort of planning and writing out possible answers to this, are the following things. So why do we have restrictions, and why have we had changes in for public policy reasons about a duty of care, about establishing a duty? Why do we have those? Then why are there restrictions? And again, for public policy factors, why are there restrictions in someone's ability to be able to claim a psychiatric injury? So obviously that's bringing out a discussion of why there's a difference between primary and secondary victims. Why is it much easier for a primary victim, and why then do we have all of these restrictions under the Alcock test, which has since been amended by the case of Paul and Wolverhampton NHS Trust. So those are two of them. There's also the possibility of a question on injunctions. So, what is the nature and purpose of an injunction? What do they do? Why do the courts not like them? The difference between positive and negative injunctions, the difference between full injunctions and partial injunctions. And then I think the fourth main topic, and this is all on the spec. You can go to the AQA website and have a look. The fourth main topic is around vicarious liability, about what is vicarious liability, and effectively why do we have it. And it sort of centers around the whole sort of idea of balancing conflicting interests. So those are the main topics. So again, just to repeat, so it's public policy factors in establishing a duty of care, public policy factors on restrictions for claiming psychiatric injury and pure economic loss. Then we've got vicarious liability, the nature and the purpose of it. And then we have the nature and the purpose and the use of injunctions. Those are the main topics on the theory of tort. Just to say, I hope fault comes up next week. I doubt it will be morality. Morality came up last year, so I would hope it would be fault. But for me, I think if it was a juggle between theory of tort and theory of contract, I'd probably rather have the theory of tort. Thank you very much for that question, though. So really quick question. Ronnie has asked, will I still get marks if I only write the first names of the case or not? I think so, Ronnie. Yeah, I think you would. I mean, it's obviously because we have two parties, in civil cases, whether you're doing contract as well, or maybe the cases in human rights. It's best to know the two names, but look, something is better than nothing. And I think if you just know one of the names, then it's better than not. I think if you want to be ultra cautious, what you could do is actually maybe summarize very quickly what happened in that case. That's something I normally tell my students to do. Look, if you can't remember the case name, don't spend 10 minutes trying to remember one case. Just, if you can, reference what the case was about. It will all help getting that credit. But just to repeat again, this isn't a memory exercise. AQA don't really care that you can remember 100 cases. What they want is your ability to explain the relevant law and then to fully apply that law to come to a reasoned conclusion. That's what they're looking for. Do I put cases in brackets and gain marks? Do I have to explain it? That's radioactive plays again. Look, you don't have to put them in brackets to gain marks. You don't necessarily have to explain it. I think that would be time consuming. Normally the 5-mark question, so question 7, the substantive 5-marker, they normally relate to a case. And so in that one, you might want to sort of bring in the case and sort of reference it. But, if you're talking about 30 marker, 30 marker, and you've got maybe 8 to 10 cases, you're not expected to explain them all. Just incorporate them into the law, or I would, but if not, maybe into the application. For example, in order to prove negligence, you need to establish a duty of care, which has been changed where there is an established duty, as per the case of Robinson. That's the sort of way that I would incorporate the cases, because you're making a legal point and then you're referencing it by way of evidence, the case which created that point of law. A really interesting one, and one I like, is, I think it's Nora. Apologies if I've pronounced that wrong. If I'm unsure how to conclude my answer, can I argue it both ways? I would absolutely argue it both ways anyway, Nora. And I think you have to. You have to for two reasons. and I don't think I'm giving anything away here, because the mark schemes for all of the past papers apart from 2024 are fully available. If you look at the mark schemes, you will see that actually in many cases the mark scheme will allow you to come to various conclusions. And so you have to give both sides of the story, because let's face it, Nora, if you and I were in court, on one day you could be acting for the claimant and I could be acting for the defendant, or you could be acting for the defendant and I could be acting for the claimant. And so I think ultimately you should say this is the scenario, this could happen, or this could happen. Ultimately, it's up to the jury in a criminal case, or a magistrate, or the court in a civil case. It's up to them to come to a decision. But absolutely, go down both sides. I'll give you a quick example, because I can see it's 25 past already. So vicarious liability. If Nathan is proved to be an employee, then as long as the other elements of vicarious liability are there and he was acting in the course of his employment, then his employer will have to pay. If he's not an employee, or it was carried out on a frolic of his own, then he will solely be liable. So you've given the law, and then you've talked about both sides of the argument. That's the way I would deal with it. So let's go to radioactive plays. Do you think 2 hours is fair? I usually run out of time or just about finish. Look, I mean, whether I think it's fair or not, it is perhaps neither here nor there. It is really challenging. You do have a lot to write. But that's why you've got to be really on it with timings. Go through those multiple choice, 30 seconds per multiple choice question. That leaves you a minute per mark for question 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then that should leave you around about sort of 40, 42, 43 minutes for the 30 markers. And look, that's much nicer than the criminal paper where you have to talk about 3 or 4 things. Here, hopefully, you're only talking about 2 things. So yeah, it is. And also, I would suggest, in order to help you with your timings, start from the back. You do the multiple choice, go to question 11, question 10, and really this is almost sort of concluding where we started from. If you can do those 2 30 markers, question 10 and question 11, really well, 40 odd minutes for each one, and you can do really well in those, come away with 22, 23, 24, 25 out of 30, if not more, then you have smashed a C. You would maybe have got a B without answering anything else on the paper. And hopefully, Ronnie, I've just answered that question about running through the timings. So 30 seconds, multiple choice, then question 10 or 11, 40 minutes or so for those, including time to plan and annotate. And then that gives you around about a minute per mark for the other questions on the paper. Do we have time for one more? Is that about it? Just seeing whether we've got any more that I can answer. Can we go back to the slide? Perhaps just to do one more. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so we've just talked about the order of questions. We've talked about case facts. You don't need those. You just need the legal principles. For the application questions, how will I know what issues to discuss? Well, the good thing is for the tort paper, it's much, much easier. They sort of jump out at you. And as I said, there are some things which are paired naturally together. To date, nuisance has always been paired with Rylance and Fletcher. If you see something about someone's, loud noise, someone can't sleep, and then someone's brought something onto their land like oil or water or dye, it's a Rylance and Fletcher question. Negligence and psychiatric injury pair really well together, and you often get questions. If it's a 30 marker occupier liability question, it will be the 57 and the 84 Act probably. And then where you have vicarious liability in a 30 marker, they sort of tend to alternate. Whereas The second part will be about vicarious liability. The first part will be about the tort, and it will either be probably be an act of negligence, or it will be a negligent misstatement which causes pure economic loss. And I think that's about it, isn't it?
That is, I'm afraid we're nearly at half past. Thank you to all of the questions that came across tonight. Apologies if we didn't get round to your question. Nathan was answering as many as he could there, as well as the questions that have been posed beforehand. Those questions are available, by the way, if you want to. As soon as I press the finish button in a moment or two, those questions will be available to download. Massive thank you to anybody who asked questions. Massive thank you, of course, to Nathan for answering as many of those as possibly can. We have another clinic this time next week where we'll be concentrating on paper 3, so it'd be really great to see you again there. If you found tonight useful, do give us a thumbs up in YouTube, as that will be very useful for us to get our message out there. We've come to the end of the live stream. We've come to the end of this clinic, so on behalf of Nathan, on behalf of myself and everybody at Tutor to You, the very best of luck with your exam on Tuesday. Goodbye, everybody.